Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
And greetings and salutations, everyone. You have tuned into Dr. Judy WTF, and I'm your host, Walt Lusk. And, of course, Dr. Judy Rosenberg is in the house as well. And we have an absolute phenomenally amazing announcement to make right off the top. And that is, after a very long time, we have been blessed and are officially on iHeartRadio. So you can go to your iHeartRadio app on your smartphone or on the internet, and you can find all of our shows. And by the time you hear this show, they will all be on. And so now we have one more source that you can check us out on, in addition to Spreaker, iTunes, YouTube, and, of course, here at UBN Radio, and Stitcher. We like Stitcher.
And I'm in great appreciation of that. Thank you, Walt, and special thank you to Tony Sweet.
You bet.
And just very exciting news. Hopefully we'll reach a ton more people.
Yeah.
And today's topic is on grief. We did a topic last week on grief as well.
We
grieving work.
Grieving on when you lose a job, which I've learned a lot of us don't realize that when we lose a job, we actually do go through the grieving process. So if you know somebody who's lost one, or if you're in the process of, go check our show last week.
So some of you may be familiar with our show, and if you are not familiar with our show, then there are a couple of things that I want to mention.
Yeah, well, why not?
Why not? Okay, so introducing to the new audience, the iHeart audience, the concept of a mind map that I created many years ago focused on healing human disconnect. And that is just one of the things that we struggle with as a human race. We're very disconnected, and one of the major disconnectors is, of course, our cell phone and our computer system and all the gadgets that interfere with eye-to-eye contact and really being there with another human being. And by creating a mind map, I find it more interesting and more simple to explain how this disconnect manifests as wounds in childhood and then reactions to these wounds and encodes into the fiber of our being in the form of low self-esteem, negative core beliefs. And then we get tripped up, of course, when something happens that pushes our buttons, or something stresses us out, or something as traumatic happens as losing a loved one. A spouse, a significant other, a child. And so tonight we're going to talk a lot about grief and complicated grief.
We're going to start with divorce.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a call-in show, by the way. So if you are grieving, or nobody who is grieving, we always like to say, get on the couch with your emotional ouch with Dr. Judy. The number is 323-843-2826. That's 323-843-2826. And the mind map is actually a 12-panel system that Dr. Judy developed.
9.
Well, okay.
You added 3. That's okay.
It's quicker than and easier than you think. Okay. 9-panel system, and you can go to drjudywtf.com if you want to see it. Those of you that are watching it online, you can see it there. Is the 9 panels. The first 3 deal with your past. The next 3 deal with your present. And then the final 3, deal with your future.
And if you want to see the mind map, you can either go to my website, psychologicalhealingcenter.com, or drjudywtf.com, shorter way to get to the same place. And you can also now download the app through the App Store.
On your iPhone.
Yes, we're working on the Android, but if you have an iPhone, you can download the app. It's called Psychological Healing Center, and you can see the mind map on the app. And
a plethora of other things, excerpts from our book, which is available on Amazon, which is Be the Cause, Healing Human Disconnect, in Kindle as well as paperback. And it's going off the shelves, at least the books are. So cut yourself some slack, for crying out loud. You're grieving. And today we're going to be touching on, as I said, grieving from divorce. Over half of us get divorced. Judy and I both have experienced it, so we're unfortunate experts. And if you have an issue with that, if you think your ex is wonderful or your ex is awful, you can call us on that too, and we'll be able to deal with that as well. And as we know, there are basically 5 different phases of divorce, and of grieving. And so we're going to kind of intertwine those as we go through divorce. And it's no picnic, but it does get easier. I know I was told that, and I didn't believe them, but it kind of does get easier. Never the same, but it does get easier. So the point is, your grief for the loss of a relationship you expected to last forever, a future you had planned, but now it will not happen. So the first phase, as Judy will say, is the denial phase.
Well, denial is a healthy defense mechanism because it protects us from going crazy and falling into major depression. So some element of denial is very important because we don't want to just shock the system. So there are multiple layers to a loss, such as losing a significant other, a spouse, or even a significant other in the form of a lover, a long-term relationship, because it's not just grieving the person, it's grieving the people that are in affiliation with that person, like mother-in-laws, father-in-laws, cousins, aunts, uncles,
extended family,
in-laws, extended family and friends, and so on. And then the other layer is that you've built up a ton of memories with this individual.
Yes.
So one must be very, very cognizant of the triggers that present themselves, triggers such as common songs, restaurants in common, smells that you enjoyed together, foods that you tasted together. All of these memories are imprinted in our senses, our 5 senses. And so when you're grieving the loss of a significant other, there are all of these elements that we are very, very conscious of, unfortunately, because we run into them every day. We may run into their friends.
I couldn't
family.
agree with you more.
Right.
I'm in sales, and I had a long-term relationship that ended, and I'd be just driving to an appointment, and I would realize as I'm driving to the appointment that this street and maybe a restaurant or something was one that we had frequented, and the whole thing would just flash before my very eyes as I'm trying to forget. It's there in front of me, reminding me of what went on and what happened.
And I think most people have gone through the experience of going somewhere and being completely triggered by the memories. And then it's a bittersweet thing because there are all these beautiful memories, but then there's that heartache of the loss.
Yeah.
And so grief is a kind of a process that has no linear format. Even though there are all these stages of grief, people go in and out of different stages.
And unfortunately, we have to go through all the stages to really make it through the other end. It's kind of an unrite of passage.
So let's talk about how people are blueprinted to be able to let go easier, and those that are blueprinted to have a harder time with loss. And of course, it all starts with our family of origin. And so if we get the emotional goodies, which are based on attachment theory, developmental needs that we need, such as eye contact, skin contact, breastfeeding, stay-at-home mom, attunement, the nurturing, the calmness, the father that nurtures the mother so that she can nurture the babies, the financial stability, all of these nice, stable elements. If we have that kind of a background in the first 3 years of life in particular, then we have what is known in my profession as a psychologist as good internalized objects. Okay, when we have that good solid emotional nutrients within us, then we're hardier, so that when people leave us, we can rebound a little bit easier because we have the emotional fortitude. On many of our episodes, we talk about psychopathology and those that are narcissistically wounded and people who have all kinds of emotional wounds from childhood based on abandonment or physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, smothering. And so when we're wounded, we're not resilient. And so not only do we not grieve as easily, we also don't pick people very well. And so as a result of the poor pickings, we end up in divorces.
Or picking the same
unfortunately.
person over again
Right.
and relive the whole nightmare of the relationship we just went through because we picked the same person, which again would allude to the fact that if that's the case, if that's happened to you just more than once, twice, you need to sit down and deal with it and talk to Dr. Judy or one of her psychological assistants. And if you can hear our voice, we can do it on the phone. We can do it on Skype, no matter where you are. And, of course, in person at Sherman Oaks and Beverly Hills at the Psychological Healing Center.
And we offer a 10-session psychoeducational course on mind map therapy
Yes.
so that you can really analyze the wounds of your childhood, how they encode into the fiber of your being, how they dismantle you, and how you can dismantle them before they cause
Any more dismantling of yourself?
massive chaos and breakdowns in your life. So
It's an amazing investment in yourself.
Thank you.
It really is.
Thank you. And we very much enjoy the work, and I have a beautiful staff of people at the Psychological Healing Center, an office in Sherman Oaks and one in Beverly Hills. And we do offer phone consultations and so on.
Sliding scale.
And sliding scale for those of you who cannot afford the fees of a psychologist such as myself. Just ask me, and I will direct you to people who can work within your budget. So with that said, if you find that you have what is known as complicated grief, meaning that you can't seem to heal after a loss, then you can very much know that something was off in those first few years of life. There was a wounding, maybe an early abandonment, maybe somebody, your family of origin, particularly your mother or your father, and you didn't bond properly, or that they left you too soon. Either you were shuffled off to nursery school or daycare, or you were unfortunately adopted out, or maybe grandma took care of you instead of mom, which is not always such a bad thing, because sometimes grandma or grandpa do better bonding jobs than parents. Of course, if you have parents that were alcoholic or abusing, using drugs, then this bonding didn't probably go too smoothly for you. And by the way, this is a call-in show, so please feel free to get on the couch.
With Dr. Judy.
Yeah.
I'll stay off it, and the number is area code 323-843-2826. So the first stage of dealing with divorce is, of course, denial. You just can't figure out and deal with the fact that, oh my gosh, after all this time I'm divorced, or I'm getting divorced, and you do, there is, as Dr. Judy mentioned, you're shocked and in numb. The second stage you go into is this one talks about expanding from pain and fear. As the denial wears off, the reality of their situation begins to sink in. You feel pain at the loss of your marriage and fear of what the future holds.
Right.
So that's, you're in uncharted territory. Mm-hmm. You were with somebody, you had a partner, and now you don't. It's just you. I remember the first time, kind of along those lines, I went to an event, and then I was in Orange County, and I wanted to go to Laguna Beach for dinner. And it was then I realized, I don't have to call and say, hey, I'm going to go to Laguna Beach for dinner, or kind of ask permission or tell them I'm going. I just went, oh my goodness, I can go. And I drove down to Laguna, and it was a very weird feeling. It wasn't, I'd been married for a long time, and the adjustment was really different.
Right.
It was it was just going out to eat by myself was like, holy moly. It wasn't the issue that I'm going by myself. It was like, I am by myself, and I can, kind of like, this is weird. I don't have anybody to be accountable to. That's really what it was.
The financial stress of it, because
finances
now
is huge.
all the expenses are split and doubled.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have
everything.
your own place to live, and then you don't split the utilities, obviously, and you don't split all kinds of things, and it becomes an emotional stress on the parties involved.
It's a shock to the system.
Very much so. And then it gets even more complicated when children are involved.
Yes.
Because
what do you do with them?
I found that a huge part of my grief was I was grieving my children, because my children were only 10 and 12 when I went through my divorce, and it was really, really painful for me when it wasn't my week on, and I would miss them terribly. Of course, I was able to talk to them, but it was really, really, really painful for me to say goodbye to them for the week and then know that I wasn't their primary caregiver during that period of time.
And they were with your ex.
They were with the ex, right.
I mean, the next stage is anger, and I'll expand on this. Your children will be having these feelings as well and may blame you for the family breakup, or your ex may be feeling angry at you for having instigated the divorce. So, I mean, there's a lot of anger involved, which is the next phase that goes in. You know, you got to blame somebody. And sometimes it's justifiable towards your spouse, and sometimes it's the parents, in-laws, friends, or even your kids. One person says, my ex took a bashing. I blamed him for all my problems that on that crazy husband. The car battery died. It was his fault. This is from a woman's perspective. If it rained that day, and I planned to go to the beach, it was my ex's fault. I had no role in any adversity that came my way. Right. He was the worst lover. He was ugly. He was a slob. He was a wimp. And my anger did a number on him and his character. My advice about the anger stage, have at it. You got to get it out of your system, is their recommendation. So.
Right. And one of the things we speak much about in therapy and, of course, on our show is the concept of repressing your feelings. So repression leads to depression. So everything that you repress and suppress will manifest as some form of a psychosomatic illness. Maybe you'll feel tightness in your back and your head, and maybe you'll get stomach aches, but the mind and the body are certainly connected.
Well, those are physical responses too, physiological.
Yeah, and then there's the depression that goes on, which is you cannot really, especially if you have children, you can't really speak your mind. It's not healthy to speak your mind to your children,
Absolutely
although
not.
I know that it happens because it just slips out. Your mother, your father, look what he did, look what he said, look what he made me do, or what have you. You just really have to monitor that, because while you're going through your grieving the loss of your spouse and divorce, your children are also grieving.
They are.
And so what happens is you've got to put your children first. Although you're hurting, you've got to make sure that you're not spreading your dis-ease to your children. And so you've got to put the boundaries and the rules and the schedule together, because schedules are very, very containing. Routine, right.
What's interesting about that is we decided to get divorced about 2 months before school was out, and we made the decision as parents to let the school year run through its course before we told our daughters, and they were a similar age of yours. I have 2 girls. And they were mad at us that we told them after school was over, because now they had a smaller support system.
Interesting.
Yeah, they could have gone to school and talked to their friends, because probably at least half of their friends had gone through divorce, right? And they weren't able to do that because they didn't have their friends around them to have a support system, and they felt a little bit more isolated. Here we were trying to protect them, and it kind of backfired in a way. It was really interesting.
I remember my kids went off to camp, and I was very relieved because they had this neutral place where they can go just to play and be away from both their mother and their father, and just surround themselves with a group of friends. So divorce reverberates. It is not only about you.
Oh,
and
it's huge.
It reverberates to all of your family.
And friends, they all pick sides.
Yeah, they do. They definitely do. And at the end of the day, sometimes it is healthy just to sever that relationship. In my case, I did try the wife-in-law thing and the peaceful ex-husband thing, and I thought I could do that for a while. And, as life progressed, it just for me, and I wish it were different. It just didn't work. I think sometimes you have to realize that the healthiest relationship you can have with your ex is a non-existent one, or at best a cordial one.
And we've talked about this in previous shows. At that point, it might be helpful if you reestablish a relationship with yourself.
Yes.
We're not stating that you need to be abstinent or celibate forever, but, just be cognizant of where you are. I mean, for me, this is really interesting. I had a friend who had an empty house, and he says, well, just live there. And I did. And it was about 2 months after I moved in that I realized that it was the first time in my life I was living by myself. I had been in a family, and then I went off to school, and I was either had roommates or I actually lived with a family during college. And then after college, I got married. And so, I lived with my wife, and then boom, I'm divorced. So up to that moment in my life, and I was in my mid-40s, I'd lived with somebody, or a family, or an entity with a group, my whole life. And that was a really amazingly surprising revelation.
Don't you find in your friendship circle, acquaintanceship circle, that men get remarried much quicker? It seems like men have a harder time being alone. They
Agreed.
really need
They
the
do.
structure and somebody to organize the household for them. And in some
It's true.
cases, they just don't do really well alone.
No, they
all.
don't. And it's interesting when we talk about death of a spouse, it's been proven that if the wife dies before the husband, and it's a very long-term marriage, that usually within 2 years, the husband's gone. It's more. That's the rule. Women last a long time. You guys can start a network, and you've got a plethora of girlfriends you can go do stuff with. Us guys don't quite do that. So yeah, it's we. I don't think we were made to be alone. It's
We're
not easy.
We're wired to connect.
We're wired for
and,
love.
We are, and it's really important to self-care after such a significant loss. And that means that it's an opportunity to get healthy and eat better and exercise and pick new friends and surround yourself with the people in the community that you love.
There's one here that I can't remember the line, but I'll find it. Basically, you want to hang out with people that are going to be by your side and back you, and as opposed to just with you. They're supporting you in a way as it's just being a body and being there.
So
and
if
there's a big difference.
If you put up the mind map, and I know on radio you can't see the
And
mind
you can
map.
see it if you go to drjudywtf.com.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So is it up there, Walt?
It is.
So if you look at panel number 8, which is the DNA strand with all the little people on it, that is a metaphor for a new life, a new encoding, a new support system.
A new beginning.
A new beginning, and it also stands for choosing people who help you up the ladder of success in life. And so one of the things that we work on at the Psychological Healing Center is raising the bar, because our parents define the bar. They define our self-esteem because we're like little sponges. We soak everything up. So if mommy or daddy says we're stupid or we're losers or we're unlovable, and they don't really have to say it in words either. There's a pre-verbal state that where we're soaking in all the sensations and all the communications. And so when parents set these low bars for us, then what we do is we pick partners that vibrate or match these low bars, and then they don't last because they don't allow us to grow. So it's really important that we decode the past and we recode the future, and in our recoding process that we pick partners that are going to help us to evolve and not to devolve. And usually if you're split up with somebody, it's because they don't help you up the scale of emotional, spiritual, or intellectual evolution. So it's really, really important to watch who you pick and make sure that you don't do what we refer to as a WTF, which is a what the Freud, which means that we oftentimes repeat patterns, not because we're stupid, but because we have this unfinished psychological...
Either that, or I call it a subliminal GPS.
Yes.
Right?
We're repeating it.
You're driving down the road, and you're following your GPS, and you realize that you didn't program your GPS for your new destination. You program it for your last destination. Mm-hmm. And halfway to your new destination, you realize, oh my goodness, I'm going to where I was before.
Right.
And so we have a unconscious GPS.
Yes.
And we need to reprogram that so it doesn't take us where we've gone, but where we need to go.
And sometimes in the process of grief, we have to get rid of the stuff that belongs to the old life. If the things are real big, like a huge screen TV or a huge piece of furniture, it's a little bit more difficult. But over time, I think you just kind of let those things take on a whole new quality, or you share them with somebody else, or the little things, and sometimes you just box them or you just get them out of your environment, because again, you don't want these painful reminder triggers to keep pushing your buttons and throwing you into emotional chaos.
The next phase is the bargaining phase. This stage is where you attempt to repair and undo the damage done to your life. Bargaining is when you stop and say, oh dear, I can't handle this emotionally. I'll negotiate anything with him or her, turn myself inside out if I need to, but I can't go through with this. Mm-hmm. You're just trying to get trying to put the brakes on, stop that runaway train, and try and get your life back to what it was. But of course, it never happens. During this phase, your ex was now the best lover. He had the beautiful face, a manly demeanor. He was God's gift, and you're thankful for him. So the pendulum has now swung from one stage and being extremely angry to now bargaining. The last-ditch attempt to coming to terms with the decision of the divorce, that you eventually realize that you made a decision, right decision, or a mistake. So that's the bargaining phase, and it's not easy, and you've got to. It's a balancing act, and we all go through it. It's like, oh my gosh, did I really make the right decision? We all forget about the other reasons of why we decided to do this, however difficult it might have been, and here we are.
And in my book, Be the Cause: Healing Human Disconnected, on the website is a form called the Peaceful Healing Dialogue, and so if you're in a PhD, getting your PhD in communication, and it's really a way of bridging communication. If only people would learn how to communicate before they got in trouble with their marriage. If only they would learn how to speak in terms of owning their own stuff and accepting responsibility for their piece of it, or making requests of each other respectfully, or watching to avoid blaming, shaming, criticizing, and judging each other, then we wouldn't be having as many breakups and divorces. So if you're in the midst of deciding whether you should or should not get a divorce, I think stop, take a breath, get some help. It's a serious life-altering decision for generations to come.
Yeah, the ripples are huge.
Right, ripples are huge, and think about it. You want to make such a big sever, which affects your children and everybody else around you. And if you do, then you want to make sure that it's for the right reasons and that there's really not much to salvage here. And even if you decide to do that, I've had a lot of success in helping save my patients a lot of money on divorce attorneys, because if you can possibly negotiate the emotions and the finances and the privacy of a psychologist's office or psychotherapist's office, it's a heck of a lot cheaper than the hourly rates of an attorney.
Yep.
So
and
try
the
to do as much
carnage
work as
to
possible outside that.
Well,
office.
I found there's two reasons why couples will go to therapy. Either both parties are serious about the relationship and they try and find a common ground and build upon it, and you've seen this. Or the other is, we tried therapy and it just didn't work. So, it was our last-ditch effort, even though one of them or both really their heart wasn't in it. Mm-hmm. So we're done. We're getting divorced.
And the opposite of love is, as
apathy.
you know, apathy.
Apathy.
It's not anger.
No.
Anger means that you're very emotional about
Attached.
that person.
Mm-hmm.
But when you stop caring, when you just really don't give a damn anymore, and that's where you know that there's not a lot of juice left in that marriage.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You've been tuned into Dr. Judy WTF here on UBN Radio Network, where we are now on iHeartRadio and Stitcher, iTunes, and of course you can watch us all on YouTube as well. And you can write us at info@drjudywtf.com if you have some ideas for a show, or you like the notes that we're talking about, or soon we'll be shrinking a song, and we went the rock and roll route this time, of a song you want us to shrink that tune. So beyond the bargaining stage is depression. And this is obviously where, you're in bed in front of the television forever and you feel completely emotionally drained. sadness, debilitating sadness, becomes your constant companion, we know that depression is going to hit, and you can go hand in hand with all the stages of grief. You may not be able to breathe, hair care takes a back seat. Maybe you don't shave for a while, or you don't even want to take a shower, for goodness sakes. But you know what? Cry it out, talk it out, find someone to help to train you. What I found was helpful at this stage was to get a journal. And no one's going to read it, I promise. You need to go on your computer and just type away, or you get a spiral notebook and just start writing all your thoughts. Just download all that stuff. And what you do, at least for me, what it did was it emptied my brain. It was out. Now it was out of my head, and it was on paper. And yeah, I could go back and review it and go, holy mackerel, that was awful. But you don't have to hold it all. You kind of just get it out. And that worked for me.
So I think that's where, again, when you're in that stage of depression, you really, really have to watch that you don't start abusing yourself by using alcohol or overeating, and you really, really have to watch that you make that extra effort to get out of bed and just even take a walk. And get yourself to a support system.
Absolutely.
And there are a lot of grief groups available. I think there are definitely grief groups in your city where you can Google what is happening. Sometimes they occur at a church or temple or some sort of a naturally occurring gathering spot. But it's really, really important because we are wired to connect. We're wired for love, and if you don't have a significant other, it's really important to have significant friends that can empathize with what you're going through, perhaps because they're going through the same thing.
Yes, and then lastly is the one that you finally make it through, and that is the acceptance phase, where, at this stage, you love this stage because you throw your head back and laugh that you've actually found the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not an oncoming train. You've learned to accept the reality that of the situation. You have always feelings of regret and loss, but about your marriage, but it is a regret you can now live with. You are no longer stuck with grief. If you're lucky, you're no longer grieving, and there's still feelings of grief, at least a little bit, holding you back. So the quicker, of course, you go through this process, and it cannot be rushed, then the sooner you can move forward and start again, because there really are no plan Bs. There are always more plan As in your life. And as Judy and I said often, it is not how you start that matters, it's how you finish. So, this could be a gigantic speed bump in your life, but that's all it is. You got to put one foot in front of the other and go on.
I look forward to choosing a partner that is more aligned with who you are, mind, body, soul. And there are too many people who ask too few questions. They get tripped up by their emotions. They get tripped up by sexual attraction, which I agree is very important. But if you have sexual attraction and you don't ask the right questions, you can again be signing up with a deal breaker. And that is not a good idea, because nobody likes to invest, whether it be money or emotions. No one wants to invest in another human being and know that relationship or that investment is going to go south.
I thought with the time left, we've got about 10 minutes. We're probably going to have to do another show on the loss of a spouse, I think is a really big one. There are 10 mourners' bills of rights in terms of just grief.
And also, we haven't even touched on the loss of a child.
And we have loss of a child as well, which is a huge topic, and that's a really tough issue.
Series, yeah.
So we're probably going to extend it. But to kind of ease our way into the loss of a spouse, and diving into that, I thought we would. There's 10 things that one goes through in terms of mourning.
Loss of a spouse to death.
Yes, I'm sorry.
As
now,
opposed to divorce.
Yes, loss of a spouse through death. Correct. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would go through these. No one goes through grief the same. It's all different. I mean, sure, there are the stages and such, but we all have to go through them in our own way. So the first one is you have a right to experience your own unique grief. Don't allow anybody to tell you what you should or shouldn't feel, because really you're the one that has to go through it and feel it. You have the right to talk about your grief. Talking about your grief will help you heal. You also have a right to be silent. If you don't want to talk about it, or you don't want to, open up that wound, you don't have to. You have a right to feel a multitude of emotions, and you will. I mean, you'll feel a lot of them maybe at the same time. Confusion, disorientation, fear, guilt, and relief are just a few of the emotions you might be feeling as part of your grieving journey. Others may tell you that you're feeling angry but you know what? That might be wrong. Don't take these judgmental responses to heart. Instead, find listeners who accept your feelings without condition. Fourth is you have the right to be tolerant of your physical and emotional limits. Your feelings of loss and sadness will probably leave you feeling very fatigued and drained. Respect what your body and your mind are telling you. Get daily rest. Now's the time to take care of yourself. Eat balanced meals. Don't allow others to push you into doing things you don't want to feel like doing. And as Dr. Judy mentioned, really get some exercise. If it doesn't matter, if you just throw a pair of shoes on and you go for a 15-minute walk, okay, I want to do it for 15 minutes. Fine. You walk out of your house and you set your clock on your phone or whatever for like 7 or 8 minutes. You walk for 7 or 8 minutes and you turn around and you walk back. That's plenty. If you do that every day, you're going to feel better. You're going to be outdoors, and maybe, in a week you might want to do a 20-minute walk as opposed to a 15.
And we also have to remember that certain people go through a period where they know that their spouse is dying. The spouse might have cancer, some kind of terminal disease, which is really different than learning that your spouse was killed in an accident or a bombing. And unfortunately, we live in a society where this is happening more and more. People are victims of very, very violent and hateful crimes, both in our country and all over the world. And so this is very, very shocking, and it triggers a lot of PTSD. I'm currently treating somebody whose brother was killed, and the PTSD, even though he wasn't there.
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Thank you. Even though he wasn't there, his post-traumatic stress disorder is evident, and he still has to deal with all of the legal matters that are coming up and the trials that are taking place, and it just is another constant reminder. So the grief is very complicated for him.
Grief can be. I mean, I met a lady whose husband, and they had 4 children, and they were in their 40s, and he said he was going to drive his car into the ground. He was going to drive his car until it, drive into the ground. And it was a Friday night, and they were going to go out to dinner, and he was late. She was very, very mad that, where was he? He was supposed to be home. And it turned out somehow he got into a car accident on the freeway and literally drove his car into a wall. Wow. And she was left with 4 kids, no husband, and he kind of did that, and believe me, that was a gigantic shock to the system.
Yeah. So no situation is the same. Everyone is unique. Different. Everybody brings to the situation their own emotional strengths and wounds and weaknesses. And one thing that we do share in common is that there's no way that we can avoid the ramifications of such a big loss. No. There's no way.
No,
we can stuff it down. We can deny it. We can go into a state of shock and wall ourselves in. But eventually, if we don't face it, it's going to break us down.
Well, what comes to mind is the infamous words of Confucius: "He or she who stick head in sand will get at least their butt kicked." You have a right to experience grief bursts. Sometimes out of nowhere, a powerful surge of grief just might overcome you. This can be frightening, but it's normal and natural. Find someone who understands it, and you can talk it out. I mean, my father passed 5 years ago, and for the first couple of years, it would just hit me. It's like, wow. And it was exactly like this. It was a burst of grief, and you just have to, ride it out and realize it's there, and it'll pass.
And sometimes that burst happens in the morning because our defenses are down, and so we may be waking up, and then we slowly remember that our loved one is gone, and it's this horrific sinking in the bottom of your pit of your stomach, because you may have even dreamt about the person and may have even had such a vivid dream about that person. Then you wake up and you realize, it's such painful realizations when you come out of that sleep-like state and face your day.
Well, thank you, Dr. Judy. What a way to start your day.
Isn't it?
Then you could turn it around and be grateful of the memory and memories you had with that person. And yes, there's a loss, but you have memories, and those are the good times. And sixth, you have a right to make use of ritual. The funeral, when you're talking about obviously loss of a spouse through death, ritual does more than acknowledge the death of someone loved. It provides you with support of caring people. More importantly, it's a way for you to mourn. If others tell you the funeral is other than healing rituals and silly and necessary, don't listen to them. We all need closure.
And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was an expert in death and dying. She was a doctor who studied this phenomenon, and she's somebody to resource. She's the one who defined the many stages of dying and grief and so on. So if you're going through something as significant as a loss to death of a spouse, you may want to read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying.
I've heard of that book. Yeah, it was mentioned a time or two in my research.
Very famous book.
You have a right to embrace your spirituality. If faith is part of your life, express it in ways that seems appropriate for you. Allow yourself to be around people who understand and support your religious beliefs. If you feel angry with God, find someone to talk to that won't be critical of your feelings of hurt and abandonment. My former father-in-law, was very, very close to his wife, and really was one of those that, the moment she died, he was ready to go right after her. They'd been married for about 60 years. And she went suddenly and wasn't supposed to go. And he said, hey, why did God take my wife? He would talk to his pastor all the time. He was angry. He was unhappy. He was lonely. And he said, I'm done. If she's not here, I don't want to be here either. So that's a common response. You have a right to search for meaning. You may find yourself asking, why did he or she die? Why this way? Why now? Some of your questions may have answers, but some may not. And watch out for the cliche responses that people are going to give. Comments like, well, it was God's will, or think of what you have been thankful for, or are not helpful at all, you don't have to accept them. So
so these pat phrases
they're
don't
just
always
cliche phrases. Yeah,
make one feel empathized with. And
I wanted to address one thing, and I'm going to talk about it next week as well. And that is, my day job, I deal with a lot of people, and I do retirement planning and deal with people that have lost a spouse. And I sit down and I look at them because the whole situation can be incredibly overwhelming. And a phrase I've found that's helpful when I helped my mom go through this when my dad passed was simply, today is not the day. You have a lot to do, and it all seems like it's got to be done yesterday, and that's not the case. Most of it can wait until tomorrow or the next day or the next day or the next day. So if you just aren't up mentally and emotionally to deal with whatever you have to tackle as it relates to your spouse, however big or small it is, just say to yourself, you know what? Today's not the day. And go for a walk. Go to a movie. Go out to lunch with your friends. Don't feel guilty because you're going through a grieving process. And if you don't have the mental energy or the physical energy or the emotional energy to address it, today's not the day. So I did that one time to a client. When I was meeting with him, I just sat down with him and I felt led to tell him that. And he looked at me and he said, today's not the day. So he took my own advice. I wasn't happy.
I bet he came back to see you when
it was a couple
ready.
months. But it wasn't that day. You have the right to treasure your memories. Memories are the ones that are best legacies and exist even after the death of someone you loved. You'll always remember. Instead of ignoring your memories, find others with whom you can share them with. Because remember, shared sorrow is half sorrow, and shared joy is double joy. So either way you share it, it comes out great. And last, you have a right to move toward your grief and heal. Recognizing your grief will not happen quickly. Remember that grief is a process, not an event. Be patient and tolerant with yourself, and avoid people who are impatient and tolerant with you. Neither you nor those around you must forget the death of someone that you loved and has changed your life forever. So those are the 10 Mourner's Bills of Rights, and I'd be happy to send it to anybody if you request it at info@drjudywtf.com. So next week we'll go more into that, and we're going to extend our series on the effects of grief, and we will address more of the grief of a spouse. We may touch on more of those again, as well as, of course, we'll have time and we'll deal with the grief of a child, which I think's got to be the worst. Yeah, which, if you listened to our show last week, we actually did the song Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton, who had lost his 4-year-old son, Connor, in an accident in a high-rise building. And he doesn't even perform the song live anymore. Yeah. So to lighten things up, we are going to do our Shrink That Tune, where we take a song, and this one's kind of popular for those that are familiar with it. I'm going to read the lyrics. Dr. Judy's going to interpret it from a mind map perspective, and then we'll close out the show. And this one is entitled Fade to Black by Metallica. Life, it seems, will fade away, drifting further every day, getting lost within myself. Nothing matters, no one else.
I think that when we grieve, and in particular, this sounds like the person is grieving his own life, things are starting to shut down. So everything's fading away, and the person goes more internal because they're giving up the external world. So it's closing down.
I have lost the will to live. There you go. Simply nothing more to give. There is nothing more for me near the end to set me free.
Yeah, so that's another topic that we need to include next week, Walt, which is the topic of grieving the loss of your own life when a person is dying and they're saying goodbye to literally their own body, mind, everything.
Oh, wow.
So there's...
Okay.
It's a very important topic. So this person's now lost the will because everything is probably shutting down on them. Their pain is too great, and life is not really a quality type of life anymore. So there's nothing more to give, and so now they're seeing the end as a setting the person free.
Well, you know what? Things not what they used to be. Missing one inside of me. Deathly lost, this can't be real, cannot stand this hell I feel.
So there's the pain and the missing of the inside of me, the emptiness, and the denial. This can't be real. This can't be really happening to me.
Yeah, there's the denial. Emptiness is filling me to the point of agony. Growing darkness taking dawn. I was me, but now he's gone.
So the empty shell phenomenon, where the person was filled with life and filled with dreams and hopes, and now there's an end point, and so all of that is beginning to go, and he's experiencing the old self as fading away and disappearing.
No one but me can save myself, but it's too late. Now I can't think why I should even try.
So there's the hopelessness, and it's looking pretty glum for this person.
And then lastly, yesterday seems as though it never existed. Death greets me warm. Now I will just say goodbye.
So life is something from the past. Yesterday, which represents the past life, is fading further and further away. And now the only thing left to look forward to is death. Greeting death, greeting me warm in death. Now I will just say goodbye and accept the new pathway into death.
Into the next phase.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Yeah. Well, folks, thanks so much for tuning in and listening and watching. This has been Dr. Judy WTF for What the Freud. I'm your host, Walt Lusk, with Dr. Judy Rosenberg. It's sponsored by the Psychological Healing Center, with actually offices all over the world, whether it's by Skype or by phone, or the app on your iPhone, the Psychological Healing Center app, soon to be on Android, and of course in Beverly Hills and Sherman Oaks as well.
And you can read excerpts from the book on
Be the
app,
Cause, Healing Human Disconnect on the app as well.
and at Amazon.
And of course, you can go snag it on Amazon.
Yes.
So we're going to close out with Fade to Black, and we are going to continue our series. It's kind of a prelude of next week. So stay tuned, and thanks for listening. And of course, thank you, iHeartRadio.